Well, this morning, my routine is all mixed up, and it's my own fault, so there's no one to blame but me. I felt, for whatever reason, I thought, hey, it'd be a really cool idea to have a Nazarene, right? A lot of people ask, like, what is a Nazarene? And so I thought it'd be fun to have a Nazarene class during Sunday school, and then, well, I had to put all that together and write a sermon, and so it's all mixed up, but it's okay. And actually, I think it was good for me to get out of my routine. A lot of times we kind of get into the routine of things, don't we? And we lose sight of even sometimes why we're doing the routine that we're doing. And I'm sorry if I mix you guys up again. And that song, Waymaker, man. So often we get so stuck in our routines, right? That we forget that we don't have to make any kind of way. God's already making a way. He already made a way. And it's just a cool thing to remember and to celebrate this morning. And personally, I needed that reminder, so I'm sure I'm not alone in that. But this morning we're on week 3 of this Epiphany series, Follow the Light. And we're going to mention light this morning, but we're not going to talk a lot about light this morning. But we're in this passage of John chapter 2, if you want to turn there Bibles in front of you. John chapter 2, we're in this passage. And I really, because this has happened to me, I've lost the significance of this passage. Where often I think, we read through Scripture, we read through certain things or stories that we've grown up with, we know, we're familiar with, and we forget and we lose the significance of it, especially in our modern world, right? We try to make it make sense for the time that we're living in, the culture we're living in, but we have to remember that, well, this happened like a couple thousand years ago, so there's some things that we need to consider and know and remember and understand. Again, we're really familiar with this passage. This was the first recorded miracle, sign, as John likes to use the word signs, the sign of Jesus. And it's also a passage, unless I'm just putting too much into it or too much thought to it, but it's a passage that has a lot of debate around it, specifically when it comes to, and I think for the wrong reasons, specifically when it comes to something, alcohol, right? And I'm not going to preach on that this morning, but I just think that this passage is one that we get so caught up in one thing and we forget this is the first miracle, first sign of Jesus. And then we try to debate something else that really, it's not really that important. You guys don't know what I'm talking about, do you? Okay. We do. The whole alcohol thing, right? Was it actually fermented wine? Was it juice? What was it? There's that debate. And I'm not going to preach on it, but just to settle it really quick, just so we can get over it, the original Greek word used when it says drunk in verse 10 actually was the word for intoxication, to be drunk. So there was this thought that maybe that's what they were doing. But the important thing here is this miracle that Jesus made the best thing. Amen. That's what's important. His work and what he did. Anyway, don't worry. Again, we're not gonna get into that. But we'll onto the alcohol thing. But we are going to get into the weeds a little bit today on this passage. We're going to talk about some things, and we're really going to dissect and discuss some things, because there are a few things that we need to remember, we need to grasp, if you will, to help us really understand what's going on here in John chapter 2. And these things are definitely cultural, and they definitely are theological. So let's read chapter 2 of John. Not the whole thing, don't worry. Verse 1 through 12. On the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is it to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." And his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine or the bad wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now. Jesus did this, the first of the signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So chapter 2 starts with the setting, with setting the moment and letting us know that on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. And so before, like I said, we're getting in the weeds here, everybody, but before we discuss the signs Jesus does at this wedding, I just want to take a moment, just a second or longer, about the wedding process here. Like what's going on. I mean, if we really think about it really quick here, the traditional key word, engagement and wedding today is a little bit different than what they did then, what it looked like then. It was something like this, right? Guy meets girl. Girl, after being annoyed with guy, decides that she kind of likes him. That's what happened to us. But the girl and guy, they start dating, right? Then they start to kind of get serious and decide that, I kind of like this person. And then maybe they meet each other's families after they've already been dating for a while. And then they fall in love. There, I was waiting. I knew somebody was going to do it. Thanks, Paul. And they fall in love, and then the guy proposes to the girl, and hopefully the girl says yes. And then they go and they tell their families and friends, right? They tell everybody what had happened, and then life kind of goes on from that moment as they're preparing for the wedding. I mean, they're engaged, but then the wedding day comes, and then the guy and the girl they invite their family and friends, and it's hopefully a packed place, and they say their vows to each other, and then they go and they just celebrate for a few hours, right? And then the guy and girl are now married, and they then leave usually that night or the day after, whatever, for their honeymoon alone. They're alone when they go, okay? And then they return and they start their family. That's kind of, I said traditional way of it. That pretty much sums it up, right? It's kind of, in a nutshell, that's pretty close. Now remember, the key word here is traditional. I know that there are a few nuances here. Living in our world today, some of these things might be out of order, but we get it, right? That's the traditional way that we do marriage. Well, the marriage process in the Jewish tradition, and here in John 2, was a little different. It was just a little different. In our culture, it starts with the guy and the girl meeting, right? And then they decide, hey, we kind of like each other, and then it goes from there. But in this time, in John 2, there really wasn't dating. I didn't know if that was a word, right? There was no dating scene going on here. There wasn't a club. There wasn't a restaurant. They go out and eat together, or a movie or whatever. There was no dating. Most marriages started, or most dating, if you will, started with the families deciding that these two people were going to be together. Usually the dad and the mom would decide and arrange this marriage or this relationship. Marriages weren't started based on love either, right? We decide we love each other, and then, progression happens, and we decide we want to get married and start a family. Marriages then didn't start with that basis, at least with the boy and the girl, right? With the two people being married. Love wasn't at the center at first. Hopefully they grew in love. But here, their marriages were economical. They had purpose. They helped with their social status, like driving their social status, and they were even religious. They had to do with the religion. Jew married Jew. There were actual negotiations going on between families that were taking place here for the groom and the bride to marry. They were agreeing on things before things progressed. The groom's family would pay a bride price, not bribe, but bride price, okay? And then a dowry from the bride's family. They'd have a dowry for their new household, and that would be given. Then they would enter into the betrothal period, this was an actual legally binding contract. And at this point, when they're betrothed together, they were legally married. They were legally husband and wife. But when they're betrothed, they wouldn't yet consummate the marriage, if you know what I mean. For some of our ears. I'm going to ask your parents later. But there would be a ceremony at this point too, at the betrothal. They would hold a ceremony because this was a legally binding thing. And the betrothal would last typically 1 year. That was the average. It would last 1 year. And in that year, the groom would be preparing the household, or preparing the house. He'd be finding a house or building a house or adding on to his parents' house. And then the bride would be preparing herself for married life, learning the things that she has to learn to be a good wife. And then finally, after the year, after the betrothal, after that year, then they would have the wedding ceremony. Okay? There would be a ceremony, there would be a celebration. And this ceremony, this wedding ceremony, marked the next and final stage of their marriage. They were already married, but now they're married, basically. And this ceremony that they had, it was long. It was really long. The groom's party would go to the bride's house and get her usually at night. Jesus tells this kind of story what happens. Anyway, and the groom's family or friends would bring back the bride to their house, to their new home, and then the ceremony would begin. And this celebration, this long celebration, would usually last about a week. Could you imagine hanging out with everybody for a week? Your family? You know what I'm talking about here? You got a sibling that sometimes you're like, one day, okay, but a week? Okay, good. Because, we've all got family like that, I'm sure, and we love them, of course. But a week, right? And depending on the wealth of the family, some of them literally couldn't afford to feed these people and celebrate for a week. And so, basically, when the wine ran out was when the party ended. Okay, but if it ran out too early, that's a problem. Okay? And so I think, anyway, that first night is when the couple would then consummate. So they go and get the bride, and they bring her back, and they start to celebrate. And that first night is when they would consummate the marriage, obviously in private, but people were still there celebrating and having fun. And then that brings us to our text. I know, we're just now getting into it. But that brings us to our text this morning, where it says, on the third day there was a wedding. And it's likely that this was a Tuesday, because on the third day, when God created the heavens and the earth, on the third day, he said it was good twice. And so for them, this is an important thing. And so a lot of weddings would start on a Tuesday. And Mary and Jesus and his disciples, they were all there, it tells us, which I think is actually important that that's mentioned, because just before this story, Jesus' disciples, he just called his disciples to come and follow him. And so they literally are following him everywhere that he goes, right? Like, they're following him to the wedding, and wherever he goes to sleep, they're probably there, right? They're with him all the time. And so they're like, okay, I guess we got to go to this wedding too. And so on the third day, they go to this wedding, and Jesus and his mother and his disciples are all there. And then indicating that this wedding hasn't been going on for probably not even the whole day yet. Like, it just started. The wine already gave out. These people were already having a lot of fun, really celebrating hard, and the wine already gave out, which might actually indicate that this family probably wasn't that well off. They probably weren't planning on doing this for a whole week, but at least for a few days, I would think. And so they're probably not well off, intending for the wedding to go on for a few days. But running out this early would have been socially bad. Right? This would have been a bad situation. It would have been very embarrassing for the family. It would have put shame on their family. And I feel like today we kind of get this. We understand that. Like, our kids embarrass us sometimes, right? Or they make bad decisions, and it's embarrassing. But this wasn't just like a surface embarrassment. This was like a deep embarrassment for them and for the history of their family. Okay? But apparently, and this is when I really think it gets good. This is when it gets good. Apparently, Jesus' mom notices that they ran out of wine, right? And I like just think of, maybe everybody probably noticed. She noticed, but I'm assuming everybody realizes that they're running out of wine, and maybe there's some like whispering going on, like, hey, I ran out of wine. Well, then let's leave. That kind of thing. Like, let's just go. We'll just sneak out. Kind of stuff. Like, Now, I don't know, obviously, if that's what they did, and I don't know about you, but this reminds me of something, not so much of the son and mother relationship going on here, which we'll get to later, but it reminds me, at least this interaction reminds me of something else. Maybe of some married couples. I don't know if we have any of those there here today. And I'm not going to mention any specific couples here. But have you, just for example, and it's just off the top of my head, okay? Have you ever had a full trash can at home, and then you hear your spouse, we'll just say it's your wife for this story. You hear your wife, okay, say, hey, the garbage is full. Does that happen to anybody? Okay, I got a couple. You know what they really mean, which we figure out eventually. If you need to know this, listen really. That we apparently they do understand exactly what his mom. Like, they'll have to figure it out. Big deal. They ran. How does Jesus respond? A little deeper than just a. Now, this word hour, it doesn't mean like an hour like we would think. You know, you guys are watching the clock like in a half an hour it's going to be 12, so we better be done. Right? That's not necessarily, I mean, it's similar, but it's not the same thing here. This hour meant an appointed moment, a specific appointed moment in time. This distinction is very significant because it ties together a few things for us in this passage. The hour which Jesus is referring to, we now know, is his divine timing to that point on the cross. He's talking about where the appointed know what this hour is referring to. Right? So they probably had conversations, just sitting around the dinner table maybe, and Jesus is like, hey, hey Mom, can you pass me the bread? And then, this is how my mind works, I'm sorry. Oh, and then he's by cousin John. God said that I'm his son and he's pleased with me. This is around the dinner table, right? This is how they have conversations. By the way. And this talk of the hour is something that John in this gospel of John, in what he's in this letter. this moment on the cross. And then midway through it, it flips. It says, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And then John 17:1 says, Father, Jesus says, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. So this hour that Jesus is referring to when he's at this wedding with his mom and the disciples, this hour is pointing to the moment on the cross where Jesus' redemptive pointing to the cross that Jesus is talking about. And so up to this moment in the passage, Mary and Jesus are having a discussion between themselves, and I'm sure a few and Mary wants him to do something about this wine issue at the wedding, and Jesus doesn't seem to think to or want to, doesn't hey, just go down to the local convenience store and get us some wine. It's not like he's at the room. He knows it's not going to be like that kind of moment. Even more than his timing, do you really and meal that you had to eat? Extra meals being and I'll like a good grandma, that's what I mean. Where I've had similar discussions with for them, which I lose a lot, but anyway. But when grandma is present, again, the grandma that had the same discussion with me when I was a kid, when grandma is present, in those moments, what do you think happens here? Just guess. That's right, yeah. She goes, well, it's not going to hurt them. Or it's not going to hurt you to make them something else. Or it's not going to hurt just to make something that they want. I think to myself, that's an important distinction. I think to myself, okay, woman, a woman, their hour has not yet come where they can make what they want, and with their own, like they don't have money, they can use their own money, they can't do that yet, so this is what they're going to eat. And also, don't undermine me, right? But what I actually say instead is just like something like, Mom, they need to have what we're having. Right? They need to eat what we're eating. That's our rule. Whatever you want to say. And her response to whichever grandkid she's talking about, so after I say they need to have what they're having, her response is, Do you want a sandwich or something else? Right? Depending on what she has available. That's what happens. She just completely ignores me and asks them. And what do? I go along with it. That's what I do. Sometimes it's just easier, but different here in this moment. He could have just said no, but he didn't. He didn't say no. Instead, he goes along with his mother's request. Any regular jars either. I mean, the first 5 books of the Old Testament jar, right? And the stone jars were about 3 to 4 feet tall, they think. We're not really sure, but maybe 3 to 4 feet tall. And emptied, again, these are stone, these are made of stone, so emptied, they probably weigh like 80 pounds or so, maybe a little less, maybe a little bit more. So we're talking filled up anywhere between 250 to 370 pounds each. And there were 6 of them. So there must have been a handful of servants doing what Jesus instructed them to do. I mean, we don't know if they had carts or something, but it probably took a few people. And then this task would have taken them away from the other tasks that they were supposed to be doing. And it mentions this chief steward who's kind of in charge of the running of the ceremony. So he's probably freaking out a little bit. And they were probably thinking, like, whatever this is, it better be worth it because, I don't want to get into trouble. And then anyways, they do it. They do as Jesus requested. And then apparently he doesn't do anything. No waving his hand over the jars, or no spoken word to it, or no prayer given that we know of. He just tells them, hey, after you fill that up, now take some water out of it and take it over to the head guy, to the chief steward. And so the servants take it over to the chief steward, and the chief steward tastes it, and at this point the servants don't tell him, because it makes sure that we know that only the servants know, and then Jesus and his disciples and mom, they don't tell the chief steward where they got this wine from, because at this point, maybe again, they're not sure if he's cool yet, right? He's maybe freaking out a little bit, and they don't want to get blamed for wasting time or something. And then immediately this chief steward goes and finds the bridegroom. Because you see, the bridegroom's job was to make sure that there was wine for the wedding. And then he probably subs out the work, right? So it was his job, and so he goes to the bridegroom immediately after tasting it. Doesn't say anything to anybody, and it says that he's amazed that they serve the best wine for people who wouldn't, at this point in the party, apparently, know the difference because they're probably just a little too happy from the wine that they've already had. Okay? So the stone jars are filled with water, but somehow, when they draw water out of them, in that process, in that moment, it becomes the best wine that this guy has ever had. Jesus did this, the first of his signs that revealed his glory, and even his disciples believed in him. The head waiter made the ironic statement that the good wine had to be saved until now. Until now. Because Jesus is better than what had come before. We're going to go backwards here a little bit, just for a second, and just talk about the process of winemaking. Now, I have no idea. I don't make wine, so I had to look it up. Right? It's not, not an expert. But I'm pretty sure that winemaking is a very long process, actually. You've got to grow the grapes, then you've got to, again, I'm probably skipping a lot of steps here, and you've got to gather the grapes that you've grown, and then you've got to crush the grapes, and you have to press the grapes, and then you've got to filter out everything until all that's left is the juice from the grape. And then you put that in a jar or a barrel or whatever they put it in, and it has to be in the right room temperature. It has to be a specific temperature. It has to be perfect. And then you have to let that ferment for weeks or months and most years. And the longer you let it ferment, the better apparently it is. So to make really good Like, to make like the best wine, it literally takes years. But Jesus didn't have years. He didn't do this in years. He only needed a moment. Just needed a moment. Because in that moment at the wedding with his mother and the disciples watching, Jesus, without going through this whole wine-making process, right? And he uses water, too, which is interesting because they usually don't mix water in with wine, at least in the wine-making process. They might put it in later to stretch it out, but in the wine-making process, they don't use water because it dilutes it, and it takes away the quality of it. You guys are saying, man, he seems to know a lot about wine. But again, I looked it up. But Jesus transforms. So he does everything completely wrong, right? But yet he transforms it into the best wine. And in doing so, he's revealing to a handful of servants and disciples, and his mom already knew, he's revealing to them his glory. He created from nothing a completely new way and once ever performed way of making wine. And really the glory that he's revealing is that of making all things new. He's showing us that no longer do we have to go through the rituals or adhere to laws that only last for a moment, that were temporary, just enough to get us by, right? Just enough to make it through, and they just don't cut it when it comes to being made righteous in God's eyes. The purification jars at this wedding filled with water for cleansing, that the cleansing was the old way, right? It was the way and always had to be filled back up and always had to be repeated, and only made you clean in that moment. It only made clean what was on the outside of a person, but could never fully clean the heart. Jesus comes in and completely changes it and transforms it. He changes what's on the inside and he makes it completely new and different. It may feel like it at the beginning of this story, but this moment at the wedding in Cana is no accident. In this moment, Jesus chose this setting to be where he would start to unfold the story of redemption and reveal the kingdom of God that is breaking into the world. In this moment, the new wine of his kingdom is replacing the old way, the old covenant of law and sacrifice over and over and over again, where the wine, the blood of Jesus, and the sacrifice of Christ will be, was, and is sufficient. I feel like I can really identify with these stone jars. A lot of times outwardly clean and polished, but by ritual, but inwardly needing transformation. Needing the living water to be turned into the new wine of Christ's redemptive power. One that, unlike in this story, we do go through the making new process, right? Of crushing and pressing and surrendering. And in so doing, we become these vessels, this new creation that is restored in order, not for our own benefit, not for anything that we can or could do, but in order that the light of Christ can shine in and through us, so that his glory is revealed to the world, and better yet, better than just to the world, that his glory is revealed so that your neighbor, your actual neighbor, that we talked last week, the person to the left or the right or behind or in front of you, or your actual neighbor at home, that where you live, your actual brothers and sisters, your family, your parents, your friends, that friend, that person that you've been witnessing to about Christ, or that person that for whatever reason, everybody that interacts with them thinks this person has absolutely no chance in the world. There's no chance that they would ever surrender to anything or anyone, especially to religion, especially to Jesus, so that they too would believe in Jesus and surrender their lives to the one who turned water into wine. The one who transforms hearts and he makes them new. You see, faith is the purpose of this miracle. As it is in all of the miracles in John's gospel, faith is the reason John wrote this book. If we look to chapter 20, verse 31. I had it marked and I lost it. Chapter 20, verse 31. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. Faith is why we preach. Sermons aren't political essays designed, or they shouldn't be political essays designed to enlighten people and produce enough guilt, right? Try to make you feel guilty to get you to then recycle your wine bottles, per se. But to communicate faith in Jesus Christ. Faith is not a matter of persuasion, but of wonder at the miracle of Christ. Church, in Christ, the very nature of glory is being redefined here. It is a glory with a silent purpose and aim to create and maintain faith in Christ Jesus, who responds to our human need in ways that often seem hidden or we don't always see, and they can seem mysterious, but whose deeds are open to the eyes of faith. This passage ends with, they saw his glory. They saw it. And then they believed. Church, his glory is all around us. He's already revealed it. He's already done all of the work. You see it. Believe it.